Marcus Cole had never planned to visit the capital world of the Valkyrie Empire. But the universe rarely cared about human plans. His cargo ship, the Rusty Dreamer, had suffered a catastrophic engine failure 3 days ago. And now he found himself stranded on a world called the Throne of Ethon, surrounded by aliens who looked at him like he was an insect that had crawled into their perfect garden. Valkyrie were beautiful in a way that made Marcus feel small and ugly, and their crystalline skin caught the light and transformed it into rainbows, while glowing veins of blue and gold pulsed beneath their transparent flesh like rivers of living starlight. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, graceful and ancient, and their civilization had conquered 100 star systems before humans had even learned to make fire humans. On the other hand, were newcomers to the galactic stage, and the Valkyrie considered them primitive creatures barely worth noticing. So Marcus kept his head down and tried not to attract attention. He had found work as a laborer in the lower levels of the Imperial Palace, hauling crates of supplies through service corridors that most Valkyrie would never deign to enter. And the pay was terrible, but it was enough to slowly save for ship repairs every day. He woke up in a cramped dormitory with other laborers, ate tasteless nutrition paste, and spent 12 hours carrying boxes through endless hallways. And every night he dreamed of the stars and the freedom of his ship. 3 months had passed like this, and Marcus had learned the palace layout better than most servants who had worked there for years. He knew which corridors were safe, which ones were patrolled by guards, and which ones led to restricted areas that could get a human executed just for looking at them the wrong way. On the day everything changed, Marcus was running late with a delivery of medical supplies. His supervisor had given him wrong directions, and now he was lost in a section of the palace he had never seen before, where the walls were made of something that looked like frozen moonlight and the air smelled sweet and strange. He should have turned back, but the delivery was already overdue, and his supervisor would dock his pay if he was any later. So he pressed forward and hoped he would find his way. That was his first mistake. The corridor ended at a massive door made of crystal, and it stood slightly open, which was strange because doors like this were never left open in the Imperial Palace. Marcus heard sounds coming from inside, and they were sounds of weeping and low murmurs of despair. And against every instinct telling him to run, he stepped closer to look through the gap. He saw a room filled with Valkyrie in elaborate robes, and their lights flickered with what Marcus had learned to recognize as grief. While in the center of the room sat a bed made of woven light, and that bed lay the most beautiful creature Marcus had ever seen. She was young for a Valkyrie, maybe the equivalent of 25 human years, and her crystalline form was delicate and elegant. But something was terribly wrong with her. Her inner light, which should have blazed like a star, was barely visible, and it flickered weakly like a candle about to die in a storm. While her skin had turned from brilliant crystal to something dull and gray, Marcus did not know who she was, but he understood death when he saw it. And this girl was dying. An old Valkyrie in physician robes stood beside the bed, shaking his head slowly, and his words carried across the room in the musical language of his people. "The fading has taken too strong a hold," he said, and his voice cracked with sorrow. "Princess Alundra will not survive the night, and we must inform the Emperor that his daughter is beyond our ability to save." Princess, Marcus thought, and his blood turned to ice in his veins. He was standing outside the room where the Imperial Princess was dying, and if anyone found him here, they would kill him without asking questions. He stepped backward to flee, but his foot caught on a coil of medical tubing that someone had left on the floor, and he lost his balance completely. Marcus fell forward through the gap in the door, crashed into a stand holding monitoring equipment, and sent it all tumbling to the ground with a noise like shattering glass. Every face in the room turned toward him. For one frozen moment, nobody moved, and then guards were rushing at him with weapons drawn. their lights blazing red with fury and alarm. Marcus scrambled to his feet, trying to back away, but he tripped again over the fallen equipment. And this time he fell toward the bed itself, his bare hand, reaching out to catch himself, pressed directly against the dying princess's arm. The effect was immediate and impossible to ignore. Where Marcus touched her, the princess's skin began to glow. And it was not a subtle change, but a brilliant eruption of light that spread from the point of contact. Like fire racing through dry grass, the guards stopped in their tracks, and their weapons fell forgotten to their sides. The old physician made a sound that was half gasp and half prayer. Princess Alendra's entire body was lighting up now, and color was flooding back into her crystalline form, transforming her from gray death to vibrant life in the space of a few heartbeats. Her fading light, which had been moments from extinction, now burned steady and strong. Marcus pulled his hand back in shock and stared at his own palm like it belonged to a stranger. "What did you do?" the physician whispered, and his voice held equal parts terror and wonder. "I do not know," Marcus shouted, backing away until his shoulders hit the wall. "I fell, and I touched her, and I did not mean to do anything." The guards recovered from their shock and seized him roughly, forcing him to his knees. And one of them pressed a blade against his throat. "This human has assaulted the imperial princess," the guard captain declared. "The punishment is death, and it will be carried out immediately." "Wait," the physician commanded, and his voice carried an authority that made even the guards hesitate. He was staring at Princess Alendra with an expression of pure disbelief. The princess was moving now, her fingers twitching, her chest rising and falling with strong breaths. And then her eyes opened for the first time in weeks. They were the color of liquid gold, and they were alive with confusion and wonder. "I can feel my light," she whispered, and tears of pure luminescence streamed down her face. "I can feel it burning again." She turned her head and looked directly at Marcus. This strange small creature with his dull skin and terrified eyes. And something passed between them that neither of them understood. "Take the human to the dungeons," the guard captain ordered. "He will await the Emperor's judgment there." They dragged Marcus away, and the last thing he saw before the doors closed was the princess sitting up in her bed of light, staring after him with those golden eyes. He had no idea what had just happened. He only knew that his life, which had been simple and unremarkable just minutes ago, would never be the same again in the dungeons beneath the palace. Marcus sat alone in darkness and waited to die. And above him, the news spread through the palace like wildfire. The human had touched the dying princess, and somehow, impossibly, she had begun to heal. 3 days passed in the darkness of the dungeon, and Marcus had given up hope of ever seeing sunlight again. He had been given water and a small amount of food, which meant they wanted him alive for something. But he could not imagine what that something might be except a public execution for the crime of touching royalty on the 4th day. Guards came and dragged him from his cell, and they brought him not to the execution grounds, but to a chamber filled with strange machines and bright lights. The old physician from the princess's room was waiting there, and his name was Calvarus, and he looked at Marcus with the same expression a scientist might give a puzzle that refused to make sense. "The human will submit to examination," Calvarus said. And it was not a request. For hours they tested him, and they scanned his body with devices that hummed and clicked. They took samples of his blood and his skin and even his hair, and they made him touch various objects while machines recorded everything. Marcus answered their questions, honestly, because he had nothing to hide. And he told them he was just a cargo hauler, that he had no special abilities, that he had never done anything like this before in his entire life. Calvarus listened and took notes and said nothing. When the testing was finally over, guards escorted Marcus through the palace, and this time they did not take him back to the dungeon, but to the imperial throne room itself. The chamber was vast beyond human. comprehension, and its ceiling disappeared into darkness high above, while its walls were lined with thousands of Valkyrie nobles and officials, all of them staring at the small human being led before their emperor, Emperor Vorith. Valsothis sat upon a throne of crystallized starlight, and his presence was overwhelming in a way that made Marcus's knees want to buckle. The Emperor's inner light was so brilliant that looking at him directly was almost painful, and power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "This is the creature that touched my daughter?" the Emperor asked, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "It is." "Your radiance," Calvarus answered, stepping forward with a bow. "And you claim he somehow healed her of the fading, a disease that has no cure and has never been reversed in all our recorded history." "I do not claim he healed her, your radiance, but I have studied the results of my examination, and I believe I understand what happened." The Emperor leaned forward on his throne, and his blazing eyes fixed on the old physician. "Explain." Calvarus activated a display that showed complex diagrams and charts, and he spoke in terms that Marcus barely understood. But the basic idea became clear enough. Humans, it seemed, were different from every other species in the known galaxy. Human cells produced a unique form of energy that the Valkyrie had never encountered before, and Calvarus called it Etherbloom, which meant something like raw life force or primal vitality. Most alien species found this energy uncomfortable or even toxic in large amounts, which was one reason why other races often felt uneasy around humans without knowing why. But the Valkyrie were different. Their bodies ran on light energy, on the crystalline fire that burned within them, and human Etherbloom was compatible with their biology in an extraordinary way. When the human touched Princess Alendra, Calvarus explained, his Etherbloom flowed into her fading core and reignited it like fuel poured on dying embers. And this is why her light returned with such sudden strength. The court erupted in whispers and murmurs, and Marcus could feel thousands of eyes examining him with new interest and suspicion. "Are you saying this human cured my daughter?" the Emperor demanded. "No, your radiance," Calvarus said carefully. "I am saying he sustained her, and there is a critical difference." He explained that the princess was not healed, and the fading still existed within her, but the human's energy had given her body the strength to fight against it. Without continued contact with the human, her light would begin to fade again, and eventually the disease would claim her as it had always intended. "How much contact?" the Emperor asked, and his voice had grown quiet and dangerous. "Regular physical touch. Your radiance, perhaps an hour each day at minimum. And the closer and more prolonged the contact, the stronger the sustaining effect." Silence fell over the throne room, and Marcus felt like he was watching his own fate being decided by beings who saw him as barely more than an animal. The command animal. An animal. That he was watching his own fate being decided by beings who saw him as barely more than an animal. The Emperor rose from his throne, and he descended the steps until he stood directly before Marcus, towering over the human like a god regarding an insect. "You have committed a crime punishable by death," the Emperor said. "You touched royal blood without permission, and by our laws I could have you executed 1,000 times over." Marcus said nothing because there was nothing to say. "But you have also saved my daughter's life, and I find myself caught between justice and gratitude, between law and love." The Emperor's blazing eyes bore into Marcus with an intensity that was almost physical. "I offer you a choice, human, though it is perhaps not much of one, and you may accept it or refuse it." "What choice?" Marcus managed to ask. "You will remain in the palace as my daughter's attendant, and you will provide her with the contact she needs to survive. And in exchange you will be given comfortable quarters, adequate food, and your life. And if I refuse, then you will be executed for your crime, and my daughter will fade and die, and everyone will lose, Marcus wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. And he was a cargo hauler who just wanted to fix his ship and go home. But now he was being told he had to spend his life as a living medicine for an alien. Princessy thought about the stars he would never see again, and the freedom he would never taste, and the life he had planned that would never happen. Then he thought about the princess with her golden eyes, lying in that bed of light, dying slowly while everyone around her wept. "I accept," he said. The emperor nodded once, and something that might have been respect flickered in his ancient eyes. "Then it is done. And from this day forward you are bound to the service of Princess Elindra Velsothis until death releases you from your duty." Guards led Marcus away to his new quarters, which were larger and more comfortable than anywhere he had ever lived, but which felt like a prison nonetheless. Through the window he could see the spires of the capital city stretching toward the sky, and somewhere beyond them lay the spaceport where his ship waited. He wondered if he would ever see it again that night. Servants came to bring him to the princess, and she was sitting up in her bed now, still weak but alive, and her golden eyes watched him as he entered. "So you are the human who saved my life," she said, and her voice was musical but cold. "I just fell and touched you by accident," Marcus replied. "I did not mean to save anyone, and yet here you are, bound to me like a servant, and I am bound to you like a patient to her medicine. And neither of us chose this fate." She gestured for him to sit beside her bed, and when he did, she extended her hand. "We might as well begin," she said. "Touch me, human, and keep me alive for another day." Marcus took her crystalline hand in his, and her skin was cool and smooth like polished glass. And where their hands met, he could almost feel something flowing out of him and into her. Her light brightened just slightly, and she let out a small sigh of relief. They sat there in silence, two strangers bound together by accident and necessity, neither of them knowing that this strange partnership would one day change the entire empire. But that knowledge was still far away, and for now there was only the quiet room, the glow of alien light, and the warmth of human hands. Weeks turned into months, and Marcus fell into a strange routine that he never could have imagined. Every morning, he would wake in his comfortable chambers, eat a breakfast that was better than anything he had ever tasted on his cargo ship, and then make his way to Princess Elindra's quarters to spend the required hours in physical contact with her aunt. First, she treated him like furniture, like an object that existed only to serve a function, and she would hold his hand while reading reports or conducting meetings with advisors. Barely acknowledging his presence, the court watched them with a mixture of fascination and disgust, and whispers followed Marcus wherever he went, calling him the pet human, the princess's creature, the alien parasite that had attached itself to royalty. He learned to ignore the stares and the cruel words, and he focused instead on surviving each day. Elindra was not cruel to him exactly, but she was cold and distant, and she made it clear that she considered their arrangement an embarrassment that she was forced to endure. "You must understand," she told him one day while they sat in her garden, her hand resting in his. "I was raised to believe that I would die young, and all my life I prepared for that death with dignity. And now instead I am kept alive by a creature my people consider barely sentient." "I am not barely sentient," Marcus replied, and there was heat in his voice that surprised them both. "I did not say you were. I said my people consider you so. And there's a difference between what people believe and what is true." That was the first time she had acknowledged that she might see him as something more than an animal. And it was a small thing, but it felt like progress as the months passed. Their conversations grew longer and deeper, and Elindra began to ask him questions about Earth and humanity that went beyond mere curiosity. He told her about human history, about the wars and the famines and the diseases that had nearly destroyed his species 100 times over. and about how humanity had survived each catastrophe through sheer stubborn refusal to die. He told her about human art and music, about the way humans could find beauty in darkness and hope in despair, and about the strange human belief that tomorrow might always be better than today. She listened with growing fascination, and she shared her own stories. In return, Alindra spoke of the burden of being an imperial heir, of the expectations placed upon her since birth, and of the loneliness that came from being so elevated that no one could truly be her equal. She told him about the fating, how it had struck her family for generations, claiming the brightest and most promising heirs, and how she had watched her older sister die from it when she was just a child. "I always knew it would come for me too," she said, and her voice was soft with old grief. "I just did not expect it so soon, and I did not expect to be saved by something so impossible." Marcus felt something shift between them in that moment, and he realized that beneath her cold exterior, Alindra was just as scared and lonely as he was. One day, the royal physician Calvarus summoned Marcus for another examination, and the old Valkyrie looked troubled as he studied the results. "There is something you should know," Calvarus said. "Something I have observed but have not yet reported to the Emperor." "What is it?" "Your contact with the princess is not a one-way exchange, and when you give her your Etherbloom, you are giving away part of your own life force." Marcus felt his stomach drop, and he asked what that meant. "It means you are aging faster than you should, and each hour you spend sustaining her costs you something that cannot be recovered. And if this continues for years or decades, your lifespan will be significantly shortened." Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, and he thought about what this meant, and then he shrugged. "I was not using those years for anything important anyway." Calvarus stared at him with an expression of complete incomprehension. "You would sacrifice your own lifespan for a woman who barely acknowledges your existence, and you say this as if it means nothing? She would have died without me, and now she gets to live. And that seems like a fair trade." The physician shook his head slowly, and something like wonder crept into his ancient voice. "Humans are very strange creatures." Marcus did not tell Alindra what he had learned, but she found out anyway because Calvarus reported his findings to the Emperor, and the information eventually reached her. Here she confronted him in her chambers that night, her golden eyes blazing with an emotion he could not identify. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Are you dying to keep me alive?" "I am not dying. I am just aging a little faster, and it is not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" Her voice rose sharply. "You are burning through your own life to fuel mine, and you never thought to tell me this? What would it have changed? You still need me to survive, and I agreed to help you. And knowing the cost does not change my decision." Alindra stared at him for a long moment, and then she did something that shocked him completely. She began to cry, not the luminescent tears of Valkyrie grief, but something raw and more human, her shoulders shaking with emotion she could not contain. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "We are strangers, and I have treated you poorly, and you owe me nothing. So why would you give your life for mine?" Marcus reached out and took her hand, not because she needed the contact, but because it felt like the right thing to do. "Because you asked me to stay," he said simply. "And because someone has to." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something change in her golden eyes. Something that had been frozen for a very long time beginning to thaw. "You are the strangest creature I have ever met," she said. "I get that a lot." She laughed, and it was the first time he had ever heard her laugh. And the sound was like bells ringing in a clear morning sky. From that day forward, everything was different between them, and the cold distance that had separated them began to melt away like ice in spring sunlight. Alindra started asking for his opinions in meetings, started treating him as an advisor rather than a servant, and the court noticed and whispered even more furiously. But neither of them cared about the whispers. Anymore, they had found something unexpected in each other. Something that neither of them could name, but both of them recognized it was not love. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might one day become love. And for now, that was enough. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the court, a noble named Lord Vathan watched their growing closeness with calculating eyes. He had coveted the throne for years, and the princess's illness had seemed like a gift from the universe. But now this human had ruined everything. It was time. Vathan decided to take matters into his own hands. Lord Vathan Velmaris was a patient creature, and he had waited decades for his chance at the throne, watching and planning and positioning his pieces across the great game of imperial politics. The princess's illness had seemed like the answer to his prayers, and with her death, the succession would have fallen into chaos. Chaos that Vathan was perfectly positioned to exploit, but now a single human had ruined everything. And Vathan found himself facing a future where Alindra would live and rule and leave him forever in the shadows. He could not allow that to happen. The plan he devised was elegant in its simplicity, and it began with whispers and rumors planted carefully throughout the court. Stories spread about the human Marcus Cole. Dark stories that painted him not as a savior, but as a spy, an agent of humanity sent to infiltrate the empire and corrupt the imperial heir. Have you not noticed how she listens to him now? Vathan's agents would say, how she values his opinions above those of her own people. The human has bewitched her, and through her, he will control the throne itself. The xenophobic factions of the court, those who had always opposed contact with primitive species like humanity, seized upon these rumors with enthusiasm. Calls for Marcus's execution began to rise again, and even some who had previously supported him started to wonder if perhaps there was truth to the accusations. Marcus noticed the change in atmosphere, the hostile glares and cold shoulders. But he had faced worse in his years as a cargo hauler, and he refused to let it intimidate him. Alindra noticed too, and she grew angry at the attacks on her human companion, defending him publicly in ways that only fueled the rumors further. You should be more careful, Marcus warned her one evening. The more you defend me, the more they think I have influenced you. Let them think what they want, she replied fiercely. I will not abandon the one person who has given me my life back. But Vathan was not content with mere rumors, and he knew that as long as Marcus lived, the princess would survive, and as long as she survived, his path to power remained blocked. He needed a more permanent solution. The Shrike Syndicate was legendary throughout the galaxy, a guild of assassins whose skills were unmatched and whose prices were astronomical. And Vathan had spent years accumulating the fortune necessary to afford their services. 3 Shrikes accepted the contract, and they were creatures of shadow and silence, masters of death who had never failed to eliminate a target. Their mission was simple: kill the human, make it look like an accident, and disappear before anyone knew they had been there. The attack came during a ceremonial feast celebrating the anniversary of the Emperor's coronation. The grand hall was filled with thousands of guests, and music played while dancers performed elaborate routines. And the finest foods and drinks of 100 worlds were served on platters of crystallized light. Marcus sat beside Alindra at the high table, uncomfortable in the formal clothes they had made him wear, but present because she had insisted he attend. He was reaching for his drink when something made him pause. A feeling he could not explain. An instinct honed by years of surviving in dangerous places, where trusting your gut was the difference between life and death. The shadows near the wall seemed wrong somehow. Too dark, too still, and Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He moved without thinking, grabbing Alindra and pulling her down just as something whistled through the air where her head had been a moment before. The feast erupted into chaos. 3 figures materialized from the shadows, assassins in dark armor that seemed to absorb light itself. and they moved with a speed and grace that made the palace guards look like children playing at soldiers. But they were not targeting Alindra. Marcus realized they were coming for him. The Valkyrie guards tried to intercept them, but the shrikes flowed around their attacks like water around stones. Leaving broken bodies in their wake, Marcus pushed Alindra toward a group of guards and turned to face the assassins alone. He had no weapons, no armor, no training in formal combat, and he was facing three of the deadliest killers in the galaxy. But Marcus Cole was human, and humans did not need formal training to fight. They needed desperation. The first shrike reached him, blade flashing in a strike meant to open his throat, and Marcus threw himself sideways, grabbed a heavy serving platter from a nearby table, and swung it with all his strength. The platter caught the assassin across the face, staggering it, and Marcus followed up with a kick to its knee that sent it crashing to the floor. The second shrike attacked from behind, and its blade bit into Marcus's shoulder. But he twisted with the blow, grabbed the assassin's arm, and pulled it into a brutal headbutt that shattered something in its faceplate, exploded through Marcus's body. But he had learned long ago to ignore pain, to push through it and keep moving, because stopping meant dying. The third shrike was more cautious, circling him with its blade ready, and Marcus grabbed a fallen guard's weapon, a crystalline staff that hummed with energy, and held it like a club. "Come on then," he growled, blood running down his arm. "Let us finish this." The assassin lunged, and Marcus met its attack with a ferocity that shocked everyone watching. He fought like an animal, like a creature that had never learned that some fights could not be won. And he took wounds that would have crippled a Valkyrie, but kept fighting anyway. The staff shattered against the shrike's armor. So Marcus used his fists. He used his elbows and his knees and his teeth. He used everything he had. When it was over, two shrikes lay dead on the floor, and the third had fled into the shadows. And Marcus stood swaying in the middle of the carnage, covered in blood, both his own and his enemies'. Entire court stared at him in stunned silence. This primitive human, this fragile creature from an insignificant world, had just killed two of the most feared assassins in the galaxy. With his bare hands, Alindra pushed through the crowd and caught him as his legs finally gave out, and she held him in her arms while healers rushed forward. "You fool," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You impossible fool. Had to protect you," Marcus managed to say before consciousness left him. The investigation that followed exposed everything, and the surviving shrike, captured trying to flee the planet, revealed Vathan's involvement in exchange for mercy. The Lord was arrested, his title stripped, his house destroyed, and he was sentenced to an eternity in the lightless prisons beneath the palace. But the damage to perceptions of humanity could not be undone so easily. Or rather, the damage to the old perceptions. The court had watched a single human defeat impossible odds through nothing but stubborn refusal to die. And they had seen something that forced them to reconsider everything they thought they knew. If one exhausted cargo hauler could do this, what else had they underestimated about humanity? What else might humans be capable of? Marcus woke 3 days later to find Alindra sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, and her golden eyes were soft with an emotion that took his breath away. "You almost died for me," she said. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of deep intimacy among the Valkyrie. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered, "and I do not know what to do about it." Marcus reached up with his uninjured arm and touched her crystalline cheek. "Maybe we can figure it out together." And in the shadows of the palace, the seeds of change had been planted, seeds that would one day grow into something that would transform the entire empire. Marcus healed slowly from his wounds, and during his recovery, Alindra rarely left his side. The court watched this with a mixture of scandal and fascination. And the princess, who had once been so cold and proper, was now openly devoted to the human, who had nearly died to protect her. But something else was happening in the palace. Something that would change everything. Kalavosis, the royal physician, had been working obsessively since the night of the assassination, and his research had taken on a new urgency born from watching Marcus fight with such desperate courage. If humans could give so much, the old physician thought, then surely the Valkyrie could find a way to give something back. He spent months analyzing the data he had gathered from Marcus, studying the unique properties of human ether bloom, and slowly a theory began to form in his brilliant mind. The breakthrough came on a cold morning, when the first snows of winter fell on the capital city, and Calvarus burst into the Emperor's private chambers with an excitement that bordered on madness. "I have found it," he declared. "I have found a way to cure the fading." The Emperor listened as Calvarus explained his discovery, and even the ancient monarch's composure cracked with emotion. Human ether bloom could not be replicated exactly, but its essential properties could be synthesized from samples freely given by human donors. And this synthetic version could be refined into a serum that would permanently reignite a fading Valkyrie's inner light. The cure would not require continuous human contact, and one treatment would be enough to restore what had been lost. But there was a complication, for the Empire would need more humans, not as slaves or servants, but as willing partners in a medical exchange that could save countless lives. "We must approach humanity as equals," Calvarus said. "We must offer them something in exchange for their help, and we must treat them with the respect they deserve." The Emperor considered this for a long time, and then he summoned Marcus to his throne room. Marcus came alone, still bearing the scars of his battle with the Shrikes, and he stood before the Emperor without fear, because he had already faced death and found it less frightening than he had expected. "You have given much for my daughter and my empire," the Emperor said, "and I find myself in your debt, which is not a comfortable position for one who rules 100 worlds." "I did not do it for debt or reward," Marcus replied. "I did it because it was right, and that is precisely why I wish to make you an offer." The Emperor explained the medical breakthrough and the need for human partnership. And then he said something that took Marcus completely by surprise. "I wish for you to serve as the first human ambassador to the Valkyrie throne, to represent your species in negotiations for a formal alliance between our peoples." Marcus stood in stunned silence, and he thought about his cargo ship sitting in the spaceport, finally repaired and ready to fly. And he thought about the stars and the freedom he had dreamed of for so long. He also thought about Elindra, about her golden eyes and her crystalline hand in his, and about the way she laughed when he made his terrible jokes. "I need to speak with someone before I give you my answer," he said. The Emperor nodded, understanding perfectly who that someone was. Marcus found Elindra in her garden, sitting beside a fountain that sang with the sound of liquid light, and she looked up when she heard him approach. "My father made you the offer," she said, "and it was not a question. He did, and what will you say?" Marcus sat down beside her, and for a long moment he did not speak, just looked out at the garden with its alien flowers and crystalline trees. "If I accept, I can never go back to my old life, and I will be bound to this world and these people forever. And I will never again be just a simple cargo hauler with no responsibilities except keeping his ship flying. Is that what you want?" Elindra asked quietly. "To go back to your old life?" Marcus turned to look at her, and he saw the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. And he realized that for all her power and status, she was terrified that he would leave. "No," he said, "that is not what I want." "Then what do you want?" He reached out and took her hand, and he felt the familiar flow of energy between them. That connection that had started as an accident and had become something so much more. "I want to stay here with you, and I want to help build something new between our peoples." And I want to wake up every morning knowing that I made a choice to be exactly where I am. Alindra's eyes filled with luminescent tears, and she threw her arms around him in an embrace that would have scandalized the court if anyone had been watching. Then stay, she whispered against his shoulder. Stay and build this new world with me. The alliance was announced 3 months later, and the response from both species was overwhelming. Humanity, which had been dismissed and ignored by the galactic community for so long, suddenly found itself the most sought-after ally in the Empire trade agreements brought Velkari technology to human worlds. Medicine and science that advanced humanity's development by centuries overnight. In exchange, humans who volunteered provided the biological samples needed to produce the fading cure, and they asked for nothing more than fair compensation and respect. The first human enclaves appeared in the capital city. Small communities of volunteers and diplomats and curious explorers who wanted to see this new world for themselves. With them came human culture, human art, human music, and most importantly, human ideas about equality and dignity, and the belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. The rigid caste system that it defined Velkari society for millennia began to crack as new ideas took root, and those who had always been considered lesser began to demand their rightful place in society. Change came slowly at first, then faster, like a river breaking through a dam. 5 years after Marcus first stumbled into that medical chamber, Emperor Varth Velsothis passed peacefully into the light, and his daughter ascended to the throne. The coronation of Empress Alindra was the most watched event in galactic history, and billions of beings across 100 worlds gathered round their screens to witness the dawn of a new era. She walked the length of the great hall in robes that blazed with inner fire, more beautiful and powerful than she had ever been. And beside her walked a human man whose presence at the ceremony broke 10,000 years of tradition. Marcus Cole wore formal attire designed specifically for him, a blend of human and Velkari styles that symbolized everything they had built together. When they reached the throne, the announcer spoke the ancient words in a voice that carried across the empire. I present to you Empress Alindra Velsothis, Light of the Empire, first of her name, and her chosen consort Marcus Cole, Vessel of Etherbloom, first human of the throne, bound together until the stars grow cold. The crowd roared their approval, and somewhere in that vast assembly, the old physician Calvarus wiped tears from his crystalline eyes. Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, human and Velkari standing side by side, and he thought about the strange path that had led him here. Had just been trying to fix his ship. He had just been a cargo hauler who took a wrong turn and fell at the worst possible moment. But sometimes accidents became miracles, and sometimes a single touch could change everything. Galandra squeezed his hand, and he felt her love flowing through their connection, warm and bright and eternal. Are you ready? She asked. Marcus smiled, and he thought about the future they would build together, the worlds they would change, the history they would make. I have been ready since the day I met you, and together, hand in hand, the Empress and her human consort stepped forward into a new dawn, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. The Empire would never be the same, and neither would the galaxy. But that was the thing about humans, Marcus thought as the crowd cheered around them. They had a talent for changing things, and they were only just getting started.